Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Longtime listeners know, and new listeners are about to find out that I'm kind of obsessed with creativity, right? So, like what drives it? How can people be more creative? And why isn't everybody as creative as they should be or can be? That sort of thing. Well, today's guest gets at creativity from a place that, so many of us are familiar with, probably from our childhood, or if you have kids, or if you've ever lived on planet Earth. He helps organizations and teams inject creativity into their strategy using, among other things, Lego bricks. In fact, he's such an advocate and a believer in Lego that he's become a certified Lego Serious Play facilitator, and he's built his business, IN8 Create, with Lego Serious Play at its core. So we're going to get into Legos. We're going to get into how they can teach us to be imaginative, innovative, and creative, but much more than that, how they can actually affect corporate strategy and organizational behavior in the course of our conversation. But first, let us welcome my guest tonight, Brandon Wetzstein. Brandon, it is very good to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, Dan. It's great to see you as well. Thanks for having me.
It's great to be on to be on a show here with somebody who I've really recently met. And I'm just excited because I want to hear your story. I mean, oftentimes I talk with people who I've known or who I've been associated with a lot, and I'm just like, tell your story for people. But I can tune out a little bit while people are talking, but I can't with you because you're totally new to me, almost, relatively speaking. But look at you. I mean, actually, my listeners can't see, but I will tell you, Brandon has an awesome mic set up here. And when you hear him speak, even though you heard a little bit, when you really hear him speak, man, what a voice. I mean, I'm trying to convince Brandon to drop his Lego career and pick up podcasting and voice as a full-time gig. And when you hear him speak, you'll know exactly what I mean. So, Brandon, welcome. Tell us a little about, how you got to where you are and how did you get to Lego? Like there's a story here and I want to hear it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, so yes, thank you for the compliments and the voice. We're working on what that side career might be and how to harness that in a positive and fun and enjoyable way. But yeah, to get to Lego, wow, what a interesting way to look at it. Like most people, I think I grew up with Lego bricks. I didn't have the fancy kits that the kids nowadays have, right? People have like Harry Potter sets and they build everything from instruction, and that didn't exist. We just had a bucket of bricks and you just built stuff.
Yeah.
And whatever you built, you just tore it apart and then you'd build another thing. I wasn't necessarily massively into Lego. I had it like any other kid did. But then, my normal career, I didn't start off with this. I started my career in retail, actually.
Yeah.
My time in college, I attended the University of Minnesota. And while there, I worked at a regional electronics chain called Audio King, which at the time was really into HDTV. This is when HD was like first coming out. We're talking $5,000 rear projection sets. And it was a fun place to be because, right, this was like the height of technology. Wow, look at this picture, right? This is amazing. It's widescreen. And so I kind of got, my real first big job was selling electronics at this chain.
Please tell me that they were using you for radio spots.
They weren't. I did get, I did, my first, video exposure was a classmate of mine was doing it. She knew someone at the local news station and they were doing a story on TiVo, which had just come out. Mm-hmm. And so I did a spot. And it was really interesting because I'd never done a news show before. And someone totally different interviewed me than who was on the screen. It was really weird once I saw it. I'm like, wait, I never even met that guy. But it was my claim to fame at that point in time.
Awesome. I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought that was like an obvious thing that they should have asked you to do. But yeah. So you're selling TVs.
Yeah, I was selling TVs. I was selling high-end stereo equipment, which is, still kind of a hobby to this day. It's one of those things, once you learn about the good stuff, right, you can't go back. I think that's true of any category, whatever it might be in. And then, I continued down that road. As soon as I graduated, I went into management, and it was a great place to be, right? It was a growing company. But then, the company ran through some challenging times, and it was time to jump ship. And I was living in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the time, which is where the biggest electronics companies headquartered, Best Buy, right? The big yellow tag. Yep. And it was just a logical move. It was time to jump over there. And they had recently procured a similar company that was based out of Seattle. And so I helped them open kind of these store within a stores within the Minneapolis market and did that for a little while. And then, retail got to be enough. and it was time to go to corporate. And I ventured into a variety of jobs. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into here, but everything from operations to building warranties to running service repair.
What part of that section of your career you think was most critical? Because you start off retail and you're on the floor, right? And I got these flashbacks of the 40-year-old virgin just thinking about,
Right.
that's that kind of environment.
A little bit.
A little bit like that, yeah.
A little bit like that. Not that far off.
It's kind of funny, but you go from there into corporate, and you gravitate towards management. And where did this all kind of lead? How did you lead to organizational behavior and organizational dynamics as kind of where you landed? Because it's a long way from, hey, check out this Sony Bravia to I'm going to help you set up your team in a way that's going to be most effective and efficient.
So first, I just want to Sony Bravia is actually, I feel like, a time appropriate branding of a television, by the way. That good call there, Dan. And second, it is very intriguing to kind of look, because looking forward, it doesn't make sense in the path. But when you look back, you start seeing those asterisks, right? Those pieces that come up. And I think a lot of what happened during that time period, both, especially in the retail stores, but also in the corporate environment, was I found that a lot of my successes came from taking risks, from trying things, from looking at an opportunity and saying, okay, if I understand that this is what the organization wants, well, if I do, A, and I think I can get B, and this might make sense, I'm going to give it a shot. And whether it was I had some early successes, or I'm not quite sure exactly what built my confidence at that point, but I kept doing it. And one of the things I remember was coming into Best Buy from the regional chain, Audio King, and there was a massive focus on customer centricity was the term at the time within Best Buy, right? This big focus on the customer first, which really actually wasn't being done by a lot of large big box retailers at that point. And coming from a regional retailer, it was like second nature to me. So it became very easy to start implementing programs and saying, we're going to do this. So I became almost a front runner on the field side, which put me ahead, right, of the curve. And I think really kind of fed my personal desire and maybe just overall want of being that innovative side. Like, how do you build the future? How do you create what's next? Because there are a lot of people that they're fine with the status quo, right? You want to come in, I'm going to do what I need to do, and I'm going to get out of here, and that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I found that I loved paving that path, right? And trying to run an experiment and figuring out how to make things better. There was just a strong desire. And I think that was very much inborn during that time period.
So you're encouraged to experiment and innovate, and you grabbed onto the experiences you had as a regional, from the regional side, and as you moved into a national chain.
Yeah.
That whole idea of customer centricity, people still talk about that. My job in marketing and in communications, now I'm really more on the communication side, but that doesn't change at all. This whole idea of putting the customer first, people talk about this all the time, and they've been talking about it for 20 years. And you got to wonder, why we keep talking about it? We should just be doing it. And it should be table stakes. And in fact, for a lot of organizations, it is. But so many organizations are still kind of, I think, stuck on this navel gazing model where they're just looking at themselves and saying, I have the best widget, the best doodad, I've got these features and this benefits. So, of course, people are going to come to us. That's putting themselves first before the customer, right? So this is the fundamental mindset shift that has to kind of happen. I almost said mind shit. And you know what? I might coin that term. I'm going to put that down. My first episode was called Shitterate, which is, kind of to do something, and even though it's not going to be great, with the understanding that it is going to improve over time, right? Because that's the only way you get better. So in the sense that not being customer centric is kind of mind shit, you want to affect a mindset shift. So obviously that's what you were trying to do, right? So when you started to do that for your company, were you working with the marketing team? Were you in corporate planning, or where did that fit in the organization?
Boy, I say this was really still on the store side.
Oh,
being in the Minneapolis market, which is where Best Buy is headquartered, so you have the office right there. But seeing the writing on the wall that this was where they were going, we were able to actually get data, right? Survey data, which again, I feel like looking back, right, 20 years ago and going, oh, survey data, like who doesn't have survey data now? In fact, I can't decline enough surveys that are coming in my email. But at that time, especially in someone, running a store, that just wasn't being done at that company in that market at that time. And, so it was really about building systems and building culture to look at that data, but also utilize that as a point to say, yeah, like we believe that by providing amazing customer service, right? As long as we take care of our customers, everything else follows after that. And it was really pushing on that belief system. And when you're at a store like that, we're talking, 150 employees, in blue
That's a
shirts. So
big,
it's a lot of
it's a big
people that
group.
you need to get to, but also that you don't just tell. Like it has to be kind of a belief system. You have to really create the environment where everyone wants to do it, and that had happened. And part of the reason I ended up moving to the corporate office is, we were kind of recognized for being one of the stores that had a fantastic system. And one of my prouder moments of my career, they did a focus group. I remember on how to really, bring this customer centricity model more in the stores. Because at the time it was very corporate. It felt very corporate. There were articles,
Yep.
but the stores, there's a lot of culture change that has to happen. And we went to this focus group. And I'll never forget, there were, I think I brought like 7 people from my store because there were a lot of people that wanted to be part of it because it was part of our business planning process. And we had split into about 6 or 7 groups. And it was just like, this is like my proud, like manager slash dad moment. Every single group that spoke, and it was a mishmash of people from a bunch of different stores, but every single group that spoke, it was a person from my store that was taking the lead and sharing the insights.
Oh,
And so I
yeah.
just kind of sat back. I was like, oh, this is great. Yes, awesome. And it felt fantastic, right? Because like it wasn't this push, right? It
Mhm.
was a belief. It was no, we truly, this is what we do, and this is why we do it. And I'm not only do I believe it, but I'm gonna share with you on why it's the right way to do things. And that was fantastic, and that was very, very powerful for me.
It's like you created a center of excellence without really knowing that you created a center of excellence. Like all those like people from across the organization then started to look at your team,
Yeah.
and what you did. And okay, so you spearheaded all this stuff and helped shift the company into this, customer centric model, right? How does that lead to, you know, to Target and then to Legos? I really want to know when those little bricks come in because
Yeah. It takes a little bit. So I mean, to speed it up a little bit. So
that's fine. Take
the
your
next
time.
the next role
Hmm.
that I had was supporting a company called Magnolia within Best Buy, and this was a more corporate role. And this was one of the jobs where I had like 10 responsibilities. I was technically in charge of service repair, warranties. I had a call center of 2 people that reported to me. So a massive call center.
Nice.
I was able to play. I was able to put my fingers in a lot of different pots. And that was extremely fun for me, right? Because not only do you get to play in these areas, but you get to learn from those areas and you get to kind of cross pollinate, right? Once you start getting those ideas and you start getting that knowledge. And so that was one of the big, landing points from that role. I also got to do some new business development and testing. We tried to sell solar panels out of our audio department in San Francisco. It was a very interesting test, but I got to learn all about solar panels and build a process and help with sales training. Again, sort of all over the place with it. So I bring that up because eventually, through a couple changes and a few more roles, I wind up at Target. But where I wind up at Target in this kind of this really interesting time period where Target is really going after creating kind of like a startup culture, right? And this whole at the time, like I think lean startup methodology was becoming very popular. And it was this like, be bold and take risks. And, a large company has a hard time turning, right? It's a big ship. And so they wanted to really create this culture of innovation, right? Of speed, of trying things. But I worked in the operations area. And if there's one thing about operations people, I am an operations person, right? I just part of how I work and how I think. But the people who write the rules on where the line should be sometimes have a hard time thinking outside and getting a little creative on what to do because it's sort of their job to be the ones that, right, call out something that's a little bit out of bounds. And it's their job to make sure that everyone's staying within the sandbox that's been created.
That's a really interesting dichotomy. I mean,
Yeah.
how can you be creative in a role that you feel your mission is to be prescriptive? So your job is to set lines, and instinctively you would think that means okay, if I suck all the creativity out of what I'm thinking, then I'm going to be left with the lines that have to be drawn. I mean, maybe that's an extreme kind of way to put it, but it's curious to me that I'm curious that how you were able to apply creativity to that operational job. I mean, in fact, a lot of ops people are super creative, right?
Absolutely.
In trying to problem solve, because ops is a lot of ops about problem solving. So how did you get there?
So, and this was where I think I first started to fall in love with helping others unlock their creativity. And my first step, it really came through, was design thinking. And it was actually two things. It was design thinking and it was also improvisation.
Ha.
Right around the same time period this occurred, I started taking improvisation classes outside for fun because, why not? It would always look like a really interesting thing. And I kind of became this like innovative guy on the operations team, right? I was fairly new and there I kind of got this reputation of sort of innovator. And so they said, "Hey, Brandon, we heard about this. There's this design thinking thing that's happening over like on the other side of Target, right?" And Target was they would hold these things where you could volunteer and be a part of it. And so I basically kind of got voluntold to go figure out what design thinking was and like bring it back to the group. But I went and did that. I went and volunteered for a design thinking session. And for those who don't know what design thinking is, right, it's a human-centered design methodology that has some very specific steps that is now very widely accepted in many different organizations that really help you look at and approach problems not only from a human standpoint, but using a lot of creativity and imagination and very specific steps that allow you to really kind of push forward in a not a very risky way.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, this was happening in the product area within Target, but I was able to participate and learn. And I started bringing that back into operations. And what was happening is at the same time where the kind of the internal corporate marketing was this be bold, take risks and try things. The murmur between a lot of the operations teams was kind of like, well, how do I do that? And even the leadership wasn't quite sure. Like, I want to tell my team to take risks, but I don't like, what do you mean? Like, how do I actually do that? Right. Someone can't lose $1 billion. That's not cool. Right. You're not going to be happy with me if that happens. So enter this capacity of using something like design thinking and introducing the idea of applying empathy, of, actually doing ideation, but using kind of the improv principle of yes and getting as many ideas as possible on the table and trying to prototype, like test things as dirty and cheap as possible just to try something on for size. I'll never forget the worst brainstorm I ever went to was a group of actually it was operations folks. And the brainstorm went like this. Someone brought up an idea, it was immediately shot down. Another person brought up an idea, it was immediately shot down. One more idea was brought up, it was immediately shot down. No more ideas were shared. Not
no
shocking,
surprise.
right? Yeah. Not shocking. But as operations folks that were running it were immediately doing what operations people generally do. Well, that's not going to work because X. And they may not be wrong, but when thinking of human behavior, this is where I think we get into the psychology, right? Of human behavior and communication. It's not about the actual idea. It's about the message you're sending that whatever anyone brings up at this point is just simply going to get shut down. So no one's going to play the game anymore. They're going to step back and go, I don't need to take that risk.
Well, I mean, look, I've been in the creative space, marketing, communications, PR, the whole thing for the longest time. And one of the things that we love to do is brainstorm, right? We just love, you give us a whiteboard and, we suck up the day and the CFO gets upset that we're wasting all this money to invite all these people to a meeting just to have a lot of stickies on a board, like that. I know he doesn't, but I'm just saying that this is what creative people love to do. And the way, when you're tight with all the people in the room, when you have a relationship in place, when reputation comes into play, personal brand reputation, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, maybe sometimes you're free to shoot things down, or maybe then you'd be like, when it's okay, when your long-term coworker / buddy, you understand how they work, when you have permission to critique. But even then, you should, there are ways to do that. If you go to a brainstorming session where it's the opposite, where you get shut down very quickly, that's the biggest waste of time, but it's also a very good way to lose faith in the company and lose faith in the people around you. It's a really, I think, damaging experience. And the word I would use is probably demoralizing. And especially when you're earlier in your career and you're with people who are saying, no, it's a safe space. It's free to speak whatever, you're free to say whatever you want to say. And then you get into this situation where, no, that idea sucks. What are you going to do? So that's where I think some of the alternative or some of the newer methodologies around how do you brainstorm and how do you get these ideas out there in a way that even the most introverted person can feel free to offer up their input. People offer up ideas at different speeds, at different ways. I mean, I've been with powerful PR teams where it's just like, all you need to do is sit back and watch these people go. And you're like, holy crap, look at the ideas. But I've been at the opposite too, where you're inside in a corporate team where you just have a lot of folks kind of scratching their head going, I don't know what to say, because you don't, maybe the top person in the room hasn't been kind to them 6 years ago. Who knows? Right. But that's where design thinking and systems thinking have come in real handy. So, I was hoping you could dig into that a little bit more, and perhaps, this is where like visualization and I think, hands-on activation comes into play. So how does that work in your world? And I suppose we're almost going to get into Legos, and I'm pretty excited about that, right? I see this happening. But yeah, so what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think before there's one thing I wanted, and I think you used the word safety, and I've really dug into the idea of psychological safety recently. There's a great book, Dr. Amy Edmondson, that she wrote. I believe it's called The Invisible Organization. Don't quote me on that, but
okay.
And it's all about psychological safety. And what has really been found over the past 5 to 10 years is that is like the key component to high performing teams, like period, bar none. The study, I want to say it was called Project Aristotle for Google as well, that looked into what makes high performing teams. There were 5 attributes that came up, but the number one, and by far the first and foremost, again, was that psychological safety. And that psychological safety, it goes back to what you were saying, this ability that I can speak up without fear of judgment, retribution, right? That I'm being looked at with that positive lens of, right, I have positive intentions and that there's a good reason why I'm bringing up. And my idea, my thought, my whatever it is I'm bringing up will be respected. And not only that, but there becomes, in companies with good psychological safety, not only are you allowed to, but you're almost expected to speak up, right? Because this also comes on to the flip side, not even just in innovation, but think of when something's wrong, right? Do I raise my hand if I see something maybe that's not right? Or you go, you know what, that's kind of not my thing, versus, you know what, no, I'm responsible. If I see something that isn't great or could be better, not only am I enabled, but I'm expected. And I feel that responsibility. I want to say something because I know I'm part of a group that, right, expects it from me and appreciates that input. So I think that's extremely important as a foundation. I think the most successful companies out there have it, and they have it in spades.
Yep.
But then, yes, the fun, the visualization, and I think even further beyond that, which is kind of where we get into Lego. And so I first was introduced to Lego Serious Play while still at Target. I only got certified 2.5 years ago, though. And I read a book that was published called, Build a Better Business by Using the Lego Serious Play Method. And that was enough to really tickle my brain to go get certified. And when I got certified, my brain something clicked. It unlocked. Yeah. I just saw magic happening. And I like to use the word magic because it feels like magic. And the way that this whole method works, and this was actually built for Lego back in the mid to late 90s. The chairman at the time was frustrated with how they were building strategy. And he had stated that they're a company that's focused on creativity and imagination, yet that's not how they're building their business. So they needed to change that. And they went out and built this system. It took years. And the way it works is every single person they start with their own set of Lego bricks. And everyone has the same bricks, so no one has to be jealous if someone has a bigger one or a shinier one. And what happens is the facilitator, generally myself or anyone else who's certified, poses a question. The entire group builds their answer out of Lego bricks. They don't get to talk about it. They don't share. They don't discuss. There's no groupthink. you build your answer out of Lego bricks and you use metaphor, right? And the builder is always right. No matter what they build, they are correct. And then every single person after the build is done will hold up their Lego model and they'll share. They'll share what their answer, their opinion to whatever that question is. And then after everyone has had a chance to share, then there's a chance for some group reflection. And that's kind of the core piece of it. So it sounds really basic on the simple, or it sounds really simple on the front. But when you start digging into what's happening, so imagine, we were sitting down right now and I had a pile of Lego bricks in front of you, Dan, and I were to ask you to build your identity out of Legos. Wow. Right. What?
So that's a good place for me to ask a couple things about that. So each Lego brick has two Lego bricks together have how many permutations? Like how many combinations are there? There's a lot. I used to know the number.
I know. I don't. The one I do know, there's a demo that I do. There's 6 pieces in there that make a duck, and there's over 6,000 combinations.
There you go. See, thousands.
It's thousands. And the reason why this demo is awesome is if I were to have I did this with a room of 50 people, and I did get one duplicate duck. I got 49 different ducks out of 50 people, and you would think we all know what a duck looks like. Mm-hmm. Everyone got the same 6 pieces. One of them even has a pair of eyes on it. You would think you'd get a ton of duplicate ducks, but you don't, right? Our nuanced perspective and idea of what things could look like, should look like, with just even 6 Lego bricks becomes vastly different, which kind of talks to the nuance of opinions and ideas that we all have about any given topic.
Well, I want to just go back to this whole idea of building your metaphor. And, I said earlier that creativity is a driver. I'm super curious about creativity. It really does take up a lot of my mental space. And, metaphor is clearly one of the, I think, core ways that we can express creativity and get to shades of meaning that we're unable to kind of get to in any other way. So, obviously, as a storyteller, metaphor plays a big role in almost everything that I do and everything I say. And I'm infamous for mixing metaphors all the time on my team meetings. It's just something. It's just natural to me. So when I think about, well, how do you do that non-verbally, and how would you build something? I'm sure, like many of my listeners, and like you, Brandon, like I had Legos as a kid. You'd have a box and there'd be a picture of a house on the box, or a picture of a X-wing fighter, or whatever the kit was aimed at building. I don't think I ever got to that picture. I know kids who did, who would studiously kind of look at just kind of try to get there. But I don't think I ever once built what was on the box. Sometimes it was because there were just too many pieces. I lost patience and I just kind of started to play around. Oftentimes just because, I would go in different directions and start building smaller things and a bunch of different things. And, let's face it, half the time you lose a piece or two here and there. And, it ends up weeks later, you hear somebody yell and scream in pain because they've stepped on the damn thing, which everybody knows a Lego piece on the floor is one of the most painful obstacles out there in humanity.
That's horrible.
It is horrible. So, so keep your Legos together, people, but there should be a hazard warning. But anyhow, the fact is, though, that I don't think I've ever built to the picture, right? And it's the equivalent of coloring out the lines, I think, something like this. So I'm very curious about this whole situation where you have, and we've just started talking about this, but you have people in a room, you ask them to answer a question using Legos. I hope that the first question isn't, what's your identity? Because that's, I don't know if I could do that in a half hour, but.
We start a little simpler than that. There's a whole session of questions to get people comfortable with it, because there's usually a handful of different kinds of people, right? There's always a lot of people have come in, they're very familiar, they've played with Lego, and they're like, yeah, I've got this. And then you introduce what metaphor is, and they're like, hold on, wait a minute. And then there's some folks that they're not right as comfortable with Lego. Maybe they didn't play with it as a kid. And so there's the beginning, like 2 or 3 exercises are all intended to get people really into a flow state, right? It's about balancing the level of difficulty and attainability where you can sit in that middle ground. And that's one of the beautiful things about this process is once you kind of get past that intro stage, it's very easy to stay in that flow state, because when you talk about building out of metaphor, it's exactly like you said with coloring outside of the lines. There are no lines with this. You can
Yeah.
build whatever you want, right? So an example might be is I've done quite a few leadership development workshops. And after we get through those first initial phases, I might ask you to build, well, what does a nightmare boss look like?
Ooh.
What is a night? What could you possibly, you can build whatever you want. And the kits are specific. These kits are actually built specifically for this process. So there's pieces that are included that generally are easier to use for metaphor. They're the shinier ones or the
Mhm.
flags or the little flowers, but they tend to be easier to assign meaning to. But you see some very interesting and creative expressions of what that is. But what's happening, and I think what's most important to call out with the metaphor is there's a few things going on here. One, when you're building your model, and by the way, I should point out you don't have like a half hour to build. These builds generally take 5 minutes.
Okay.
So I might say, Nightmare Manager, you have 5 minutes, go.
Mhm.
And we'll throw some music on in the background and everyone will build. Well, what happens is instead, if I were to ask you that question, that could be depending on who you are, right? And your level of introversion or extroversion and the group dynamics, that could be anywhere from a 30-second to a 10-minute answer, right? Because you could go on for hours about that. But when you build through metaphor, it forces you to reduce and simplify your answer down to its core components. What are the top 3, 4, 5 things, right, that you would like to include in that model? And you simply don't have time to build out 10. You don't have time to go into the depth as to why, or that story of that horrible boss you had right when you were 16. You simply get to the point. These are the things, and you hold up your model, and this is kind of part of the way the workshop works is, and you point to what the pieces mean. And but what's amazing too is just like a picture tells is like 1,000 words, right? It's the saying. These models have like a level of meaning because you can create these physical environments where people understand, and it makes it much more powerful. It takes 4 words and an image, and suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, I completely understand what you're talking about. So through that reduction and simplification and through utilizing this kind of 3D model, not only are you more understood by your peers in that group, but you understand all of them easier as well. And so the level of alignment, the level of clarity, the level of understanding is, and this is kind of where the magic starts occurring. It happens with amazing speed. One of the stories I like to share when I first was certified in this method, I was leading a team of 8, and I
Mhm.
came back and I spoke to this duck demo before, and the demo is, we all build a duck, and great, that went well. But then I asked them all, I said, I'd like you to build a duck that represents how you feel about the organization right now. And we were going through some stuff. Our
Yeah.
CEO had just left. My boss, who is the SVP of retail, he had just left, and they were kind of like some of the primary culture drivers in the organization. And the stories I got back, one person, and again, these are 6 Lego bricks. They didn't connect any of their bricks. They left them all on the table, and they said
Ooh.
none of the teams are connected. Everyone's running down their own avenue. And I was like, wow, that took 2 seconds. Amazingly powerful. Another person built a duck that was very top heavy and falling over because we had just hired multiple vice presidents and no support to help them out. So that work was landing on my team.
And this is a 6 piece,
6 pieces. This is
six-piece duck.
6 pieces. And the reason why I love this story is not only the powerful feedback that came from it, but that conversation, had I run it as a normal discussion, would have taken an hour at least. That whole thing took 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, I got a snapshot on how every single person on my team felt about the organization. Some were negative and positive, some were a little more positive. And that, there's definitely follow up that needed to happen afterwards. But to get that type of information, very honest, very straightforward and to the point in 15 minutes is unheard of.
It's I'm kind of shaking my head a little bit in not because I'm like, no, 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 but because I'm just like, where's this been in my life? Like I feel like this is something that is another way to spark creativity or to express curiosity and express imagination, but in such a forwardly constructive way. You know, I do a lot of storytelling, and for my job and for my work. And also, of course, I'm a podcaster, so clearly we tell stories, but going pretty meta on it, like talking about the science of storytelling, or why, there's some neuroscience involved there, or why people respond to story so well. And when I say story, I mean a narrative, something that has a clear beginning and a middle and an end, something that has a setup and a conflict and a resolution, right? So just in the simplest sense, a setup, a conflict, and a resolution. And in fact, my last guest is one of the greatest business storytellers out there, a fellow named Park Howell, and we talked about his methodology, which is called it's his and a fellow named Dr. Randy Olson, and it's called the ABT, and but therefore method, right? And really, it's a framework and a methodology that helps you to tell a story, verbally written usually. I mean, but you can do it visually, I suppose, in such a clear, focused way, and it helps you to cut out all the bullshit, right, and just create something that is pure. I don't think it gets to the same level as a visual metaphor of 6 Legos. Like, obviously, a good storyteller can do that in a story, but there's a lot of and believe me, there are amazing stories. We all know there are amazing stories out. But can somebody come to an epiphany or an insight that will change the trajectory of their team in 5 minutes writing an ABT story? I think that takes a little bit more skill and takes a lot of time and thought. Whereas I think you can get there really fast with something like Legos. And, it all goes, it's just amazing me. And it sort of keeps reinforcing this thing I heard a long, 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 long time ago, where you should never call Lego a toy company. Lego is an educational company, right? So this is, of course it is. Look at what you're doing, So anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but this whole idea of building metaphors using Legos to achieve a certain end, and we're just scratching the surface here. So you have all these people who are, from, I'm assuming they're from all walks of life and certain different functions within companies. How do you deal with the folks who say, I'm not creative, I don't know how to build Legos, and then they create a 6-piece duck, it's shattered into 6 pieces, that represents a very, very complex and heavy metaphor. So how do you convince these folks that no, they actually are expressing some serious creativity?
I think it happens almost on its own.
Yeah.
It takes a little bit of encouragement on the front side. I've definitely done this duck exercise with many people who will swear up and down that I'm not creative, which is almost kind of code for like, just don't judge my duck. I'll build this thing. I'll play along, but don't judge my duck because it doesn't look like a duck. And it's fine, right? And that's sort of the fun part about this. And I think one of the parts I love about it and why, I'll go back to that day where I really fell in love with kind of design thinking at Target is I think unlocking that potential, like there's a block there. There's a block in people's heads where they've told themselves, I'm not creative. They've told themselves, I can't do this, right? I'm not innovative. And, the whole reason, like the reason why my company, I've named it IN8 Create is the word innate. I think inside all of us lies creativity, lies innovation, lies all sorts of ideas. But the blocks, whether it be environmental, whether it be mental, whatever it might be, they just need to get knocked down a little bit. And I think this method specifically, and why I fell in love with it, is I don't have to like persuade people. It just kind of happens. And so like one of the first exercise that we do in any workshop is literally called build a tower. I give people bricks and I say build a tower. And there might be something I might say, start with the small black plate and put a plant on top. Done. That's it. You have 3 minutes to go. And then everyone builds a tower. And the very first thing is like, I've just proven to all of you that you can build with Lego and every single person's tower looks different. And so part of those exercises are what really get people familiar with it. I also think there's sometimes people really glom onto it as well. I just did this duck exercise last night again with, I've been partnering with some local co-working places and they're trying to get more community events going. And I've kind of taken this duck exercise and made it into an hour-long sort of cool demo for me to get some exposure and teach people a little bit. But we were sitting around last night and I saw some amazing, powerful duck stories. And, we had a group that was getting along really well. So I pushed the envelope a little bit. And these are people that don't work together. Like they may know each other, they may be familiar, but they're not friends. And I asked, and I decided to do one last question. I said, I want you to build a duck that tells a story about what's holding you back. And the stuff that came out was, and these are again, like I met all of these people last night. And the amount of honesty and straightforward, like one person built a duck with, and I gave them a little jewel piece to put on as I added like just something to help with the metaphor. And they put like all the stuff they needed and it was blocked by fear. And they put a plate up in between their where their head was and where their goals were. And they said, this is fear. That's what's holding me back, my anxiety and my fear. You're like, oh my gosh, you just shared that out of 6 ducks or 6 pieces. And I'm always amazed at the level of depth that you can get to in such a short period of time, which is again, I go back to the amount of love I have for this process. Because if you can get to that about someone's personal things, imagine you're in a room and you're really trying to figure out like what is the biggest challenge our company is seeing this year, or what do we really need to do to grow, or if we look at this project, what is the thing that's going to make us fail? Like the amount of insights you can get and the level of depth of those insights is just, it's amazingly valuable.
Well, you're telegraphing my next question to you, actually, which I'll get to in a second. I just want to make a quick observation because recently I've been talking with folks about, social media in general and some of the issues that we see facing us today. Now, we don't do politics on the show, so forget all that stuff. But just generally speaking, the way people relate to one another, and certainly the last year or so, last 21 months ish, I guess, of pandemic, quasi-pandemic life, depending on where you live, how far you're getting back to normal or being pulled back. All this stuff is playing havoc with our heads and with our emotions, and the way we connect with people has changed. My podcasting is something that is a product of this environment. It's a way I connect with people. I love the fact that I can connect with people this way, but I think there's become a lot of folks today have assumed a certain level of permission for sharing. So there's a lot of, I want to call it positive sharing, like folks sharing what's important to them and who they are, but it goes to its extreme. And there's a lot of oversharing out there. I mean, especially when it's emotionally based, oversharing of anger, oversharing of opinions that other folks may not want to hear, you name it. It seems though that like if you get 10 strangers in a room, I don't know how many people typically come to one of you for workshops?
Generally about anywhere between 3 to 15. And they can be larger, but you generally need a facilitator per that many people.
For that many, right? So let's say you have a dozen people in the room and you ask that question, you ask them to build something that's showing what's holding them back. I think that the answers you're getting now, or the kind of the thinking that people have now, are probably far deeper, borderline oversharing sometimes, maybe, than they might have been, even 5 years ago. But at the same time, I would much rather have somebody take a thoughtful approach to visualizing their issues as a metaphor, thinking it through, and then talking about it and discussing it, rather than just, having verbal vomit and slamming it all out on their keyboard and throwing it out there at people that they don't know. I mean, and I know it's a little sidebar. I just think it sounds like it's something that, I would love to see this in action. But anyway, to go back a little bit, I wanted to ask you, because you were talking and you went exactly in the direction I was hoping, which is, what are the insights that you're getting from this? And when you do a workshop for a client, what is the deliverable? Like at the end of it all, and how long does the workshop last? I should have asked that question before, but
generally anywhere from 4 hours to a couple days.
Okay. So after a training, after a workshop or, a module, what do you provide for the team, the boss, the company, for whomever is actually paying the bill? What's the insight that you give?
Yeah, it's funny. It's actually very minimal. The general end deliverable is usually the models themselves and the definitions of the models. So there'll be pictures. usually taken, and then we'll write down what those models mean. And it doesn't sound like much, but what happens is, take any type of workshop will have anywhere between, I don't know, I'd say 8 or more builds happening, which means there's a journey that every single person is going down. They're all going down the same journey, but they're all building things. And it's intentionally phrased to, again, get you used to the method and then kind of get you warmed up. And then you start getting into building the actual things. And what happens is a lot of the value comes from not only the insights that are pulled out in those pieces, but then the actual building process itself, right? It's a combination of those two. Part of the psychology that's happening within this method, and there's a lot of it, by the way. There's many doctoral theses written about this whole method. But one of the things is this combination of what's called both constructivism and constructionism. One is being able to build things in your mind, and then building them in the world actually gives you a better understanding of it, right? So if you were to have an idea and you were to build it just out of Lego bricks, you'll actually understand your idea better because you'll see it from different perspectives. You'll be able to model, you'll play with it, which then informs your mind, which allows you to build it. So it kind of creates this almost this cycle. But also when you introduce other people as well, too. So when I share, we'll go back to identity, right? So if I were to ask you, one of my favorite workshops and is about team culture, right? Building the team culture. What are your culture? What is your team culture? What is your cultural identity of your team? And you ask someone to build their personal identity. You start with that. And then as every single person shares, well, suddenly you'll notice some things are in common, but some people will get inspired by other answers. Like, oh, I didn't think about this. Oh, wait, my values or my beliefs or my skills, or oh, wait, I would like to add that too. Which is why we'll usually do layered builds, and then it starts getting even more complex. We'll start getting into team builds where they'll actually take parts of their individual models, they'll combine them, they'll add, and this is when you start getting into team identity and organizational identity. Who are you, right? Who are you as a team? Who are you as an organization? And I think that's a really interesting and important question, which I'm sure, again, gets tons of different answers if you were to ask that verbally. But once you start constructing it and you start putting those pieces together and you start building it together, it also creates a belief and a level of buy-in. I always like to quote and I'm not sure if this is actually scientific or not, but something I've read called the Ikea Effect. Or I don't know if I've heard of this before, but the idea that when you have Ikea furniture, you actually value it as worth more than what you paid for it because you put your labor and your time and yourself into it. So now this dresser that was $100 now worth $150 because my labor went into it, right? So that similar type of effect is what's happening too when you're building both individually, but as a team. This thing that you built, there's a level of pride. There's this level of we built this. One of my favorite workshops I did was around leadership development. And there was a group, and it was a half day that was doing. They were embarking on this leadership kind of journey, and they were going to be doing a program where they were going to work together, and they were going to come up with like, how are we going to work together? What are our leadership principles? Who are we as a team? Like, what do we believe in? How do we work? And at the end of that day, I was the end of the final day, I believe, and all of the senior leaders came in. We were in a restaurant. We were doing the workshop, and there was a little bar that was adjacent, and there was a happy hour. And the very first thing they did, and these are grown adults, by the way, they went and grabbed all the senior leaders and they pulled them into the room to show off their Lego models. They're like, look what we built. This is how we're going to make sure that the customer is at the core of everything we do. We're going to share our data. We're going to, and other various things. But they were so proud of it because they spent the time to come up with and build it together. And so that buy-in, that group dynamic piece is one of the massive things that comes out of it. And then so back to answer your question, my deliverable is generally some photographs of those final items and possibly other items throughout with some labeling, because generally there's some very good information to be pulled out there as well.
I mean, I could just picture a senior leader coming in. You got all that from a duck? Like it should be. Well, but as you were talking though, I mean, I could see that there are, certainly certain problems or certain, I guess, challenges out there or certain just open questions that you're looking for answers to, that this program would be really a good way to facilitate getting towards those answers. And it's kind of almost like a self-coaching program where folks are looking at coming up with the answers themselves by building, but you need an interpreter for that. And that's where you come in. And that's where the methodology and the kind of facilitation comes in, But I was just jotting down, like, I think this whole thing is a process of discovery, really. And,
Yeah.
discovery is, take it as you will, but it's absolutely one of those creativity drivers we were talking about before. Um, Being able to discover is fueled by, and maybe even and inspires imagination, and how can you in the world today, where the customer, and to bring it back even full circle almost to what you started with, where you're talking about the customer centricity. We're not customer centric, we're customer run. Like, the customers are in charge. Your consumers or your customers or your audience, whatever those are actually the ones who are doing your marketing or your communications or whatever. Like, they're the ones who actually are setting the agenda. So, you know, you can't keep up with them by following standard old models of organizational behavior. Like, the organization, a top-down hierarchical organization, tells people come to the office 9 to 5 and produce whatever, is not going to be flexible, agile, able to handle what the market is asking us to do now. Especially when you start to kind of throw in this whole idea of values and purpose, which is increasingly what people are buying. They're not necessarily buying, especially if you're in a commodity business, they're not buying the brand as much as they're buying the cause and the purpose the brand stands for. So, long way of saying that the journey that people go through with this building process seems to me anyway, to be a very useful creative exercise to, you can even call it exorcise with an OR, where we're talking about just getting some of the demons out,
Yeah.
just, I don't know. I mean, one of these days I want to have you back, or even on a sidebar where we can just talk about some of the cool and wacky and amazing things you must have seen as people design their identities, or, answer the questions that you're asking them to answer in the form of Legos. Gosh, it's amazing. And I had all these different things I wanted to continue to ask you about, but sadly we're sort of running up on it, but I wanted to give you a little more time before we go. You're also a futurist, Brandon, and this is, kind of, I love this part of you. I mean, I love this part of anybody who says they're a futurist, but I always wanted to be a futurist. I don't know what it takes to be a futurist, except to start to be wise and kind of predict trends in a positive and good way. But in the context of your world, what are you looking at? Like, as you put on your futurist hat now, and and I'm secretly hoping it has something to do with Lego bricks. But what is your your whole outlook? What are you looking at as the futurist? And where's your area of focus, and what trends are you looking at?
You touched on this a little bit earlier. One of the big trends that I'm very focused on is this idea of, I shouldn't even say idea, just the thought of tighter communities. And this is something, there's a couple things that have really brought me into this space. And I should also say, as a futurist, this has become more of I'm just really interested about reading. It's more of a self-entitled thing, but
It's fine.
I think there's a term I read in an article mid-pandemic that talked about the idea of a social recession. And this is very much kind of sparked a light bulb in my head, because I think that not only did we have the pandemic, which is kind of this large exclamation point of this idea of a social recession, but also all of the technology that has led us to where we are, right? And this also plays a lot into the world I play in with Lego, because it's very analog, right? It's very person to person with pieces where there is no technology to get in the way. And I think right now we're in this kind of interesting, I'd say, like a schism, where we have this push to do this more virtual, right? This virtual work. We want to work from home more. We want this hybrid model. But at the same time, I think we realize that we're very disconnected. And I think we're going to see a very a hyper leap into community, into pro community, especially over the next, I'd say, 5 to 15 years. And there's cycles that predict this as well. If we look at kind of history within America, there's a book called The Fourth Turning, which I forget the author of it. But as we look at sort of how cycles turn with generations and how things sort of work, this all kind of makes sense that we're kind of coming back. We've had this very individualized society, especially in America, over this past time period. So I think we're going to see a massive influx into community, into being stronger. And I think there could be a potential divide or a piece of schism as we continually have sort of this abrasive isn't the right word, this tangential push to be remote and disconnected at the same time. So it's almost like we want our cake and we want to eat it too. We want to be connected more, but we don't want to be maybe in person as much. So I really think the amount of technology, the amount of new products and things that come out surrounding this community space is going to be, and I think already is starting to happen. That's probably one of the biggest things on my radar right now. And I'm already seeing it happen with various startup founders and things in the area here.
Yeah, I think you've hit a really sweet spot there with this whole idea of hybrid communities or hybrid work or remote work, whatever you want to call it. From the corporate standpoint, we're hiring differently, we're interacting differently. We have digital tools that enable levels of interaction that we've never seen before, but it's a different kind of interaction, And old fellers like me, us Gen Xers out there, are like, I love working at home. I mean, I'm like, I love the independence and the autonomy. Give me more autonomy. But I really do want to go hang out with some friends. I kind of want to meet for lunch and I miss those after work drinks or, whatever it is. Like you miss people, but you like being out there, but you miss people. So like there's a tug of war happening, I think. And I think that it's that hybrid version of work and life is just going to intensify. And that's eventually where we're going to net out, but I don't know what that's going to look like in the long run. Like think about 3 years from now or 3 years from now when leases start to come up en masse and companies have to make decisions about whether or not they're keeping their office space. That's going to be an inflection point to test this whole thing about community too. So I don't know, man. I think you're onto something, and I want to hear more about it. But at this point, I think I'm wholly convinced that I need to go and dig out my box of Legos and start to build, or at least go purchase some if I can't find them, and get into this whole thing because it's a whole new facet of creativity and inspiration that we could all do with. And Brandon, I think you're really lucky and fortunate, but also innovative and sort of ahead of the curve in making this happen. So everybody out there, you can find Brandon. It's Brandon Wetzstein at LinkedIn. I mean, his name will be spelled properly in the episode title. You can look at In8 Create. It's IN8 CREATE.com. And that is the name of Brandon's company. And you'll learn all about his consulting services there. Brandon, where else can we find you? What else? Anything I missed?
I think those are the two main spots. We're still playing with social media, but yeah, we'll wait until we get that up and running to share it out.
Well, Lego being analog and stuff. I mean, I understand. I would hope to see an Insta out there somewhere for you, showing some of the amazing creations that you're doing and seeing. And but otherwise, meantime, everybody, LinkedIn and in8create.com. Brandon, thank you so very much for joining me and indulging me for an hour. I know that I kind of went off on a tear sort of at the end, but I really appreciate you being here.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Dan. This was great.
So much fun. I'll talk to you very soon. If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the podcast player of your choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks for listening.